While the objectives of the early nationalists tells about how they were moderate in nature and how they exactly functioned, or ideally why their objectives were that of moderate nature, it is important to understand in depth their methodological process that they gained to take over the objectives and reach the goals that they had stated as a mandate in their working structure. So the early nationalists, who were also known as moderates, were in fact the primary people who had shaped this nationalist movement that we are to talk about. Now, the early nationalists had a methodological base which was primarily dependent, and the fact that early nationalists focused on was that it was easy to great cleverness and intelligence to trade lightly with the British, because they thought that there was no point harming the British, and they also sort of innately believed in the good in the British colonizers. So their primary methodology of opposition was constitutional agitation. Now, what is constitutional agitation? The early nationalists adopted the constitutional method of agitation. So they primarily reconciled to writing, petitions and appealing to the British, keeping in mind that they were not to harm or disrespect the British. Because as we have discussed earlier as well, people like Dadabhai Naoroji believed that the British were unaware of the problems that Indian masses were facing. So they wanted to bring in the forefront the problems that Indian masses were facing through voicing the opinions of the masses, and also by showcasing the problems that the British administration was having. But in order to do so, they did not take a more radical stand. In fact, they took a more moderate, a more mellow stand, because they understood that if the British was to be made to hear their appeals, they needed to make it moderately. So we see that they believed in patience and reconciliation rather than in violence and confrontation, but more so in moderate methods, because they believed that the self-rule under the British Empire was in fact possible by India. So we see that there are primarily two breakups in the methods of early nationalists, the moderates. So the first methodology of the bigger mandate that the early nationalists took was that of educating the public. Now, this education was done by, holding meetings, writing in papers, and basically forming the national public opinion and forming a voice and idea of the public by educating them about the happenings around the country. So, these early nationalists or moderates focused and aimed at educating the public about political realities through speeches, meetings, resolutions, articles, while generating a unity among the people of India, so that they could showcase the British that the Indian people were politically sound. So people like Dadabhai Naoroji were, the pioneers who decided to take up the job and create this awareness in public and gain, support for the Indian national movement, not only in India but also abroad. So Dadabhai Naoroji, who became the first MP of the British Parliament as an Indian, was also, somebody who, in his days when he spent in Britain, he tried to advocate the problems that India was facing, and also started to garner support for the Indians, for the Indian national movement. So Dadabhai Naoroji primarily took the help of the British people to take the ideas and the plight of the Indian forward to keep it in front of the British Parliament. So we see that Sir William Wedderburn Sir William Wedderburn, who was the first chairman of the British Committee of Indian National Congress, was the one to present in front of the British Parliament the problems that the Indians were facing. So here we need to see the fact that the mouthpiece of this change showing the problem was in fact an English man who was made the chairman, the first chairman of the British Committee of Indian National Congress. So Wedderburn showcased the problems through a paper named India, through an article named India. So the India Journal of the British Committee of the Indian National Congress in London in 1896, and this is a copy of that, covered the plight that the Indians were facing at that point of time. So, early nationalists, the moderates, have often been accused of being too, moderate, of having a methodology that was too agile towards the British. So, because the fact that they believed in the innate goodness of the British colonizers was something that has been seen in a negative light, and the fact that these people could not take up radical means has also been seen as a factor why they failed. But we need to realize that these early nationalists were in fact the ones who shaped the primary national movement for Indians. So in order to understand their achievements, we need to look at them one by one. So the early nationalists in fact had made lasting contributions which helped to set the stage for the development of Indian national movement. So they were the forerunners of the Indian national movement. Second, so we see that they succeeded in infusing national awakening among the people. So they were in fact successful in educating the Indian masses politically. Third, that they also helped to develop the ideals of Indian unity, liberty and self-governance while exposing the negativity of the British rule. So they never stated the fact that the British were perfect or the British were here to help India. But the problems that they were facing with the British were to be brought in front, and that was brought in front by the early nationalists. So fourth is that they were also engaged in charitable programs for helping the disadvantaged section of the society. So the early nationalists worked towards the social reforms as well. So due to the efforts of the early nationalists, we can see certain primary changes taking place. The first is that the Indian Councils Act was passed in 1892, which increased the number of Indian members in the imperial and provincial councils. So we see that there is a change in the political policies. Firstly. Secondly, the Public Service Commission in 1866 to improve the lives of Indians, and the Welby Commission in 1895 to investigate on the expenditure was appointed. So not only was politics taken into concern, but economy and society was also taken into consideration. So both the factors of administration and economy were taken into the working mandate of the early nationalists. Third, the civil services examinations were started being held in India as well. So with the help of people like Dadabhai Naoroji, we see the establishment of the public service examination for administrative services being held both in England as well in India. So firstly, if we focus upon the pioneer of the change, we see the person called Dadabhai Naoroji. Now Dadabhai Naoroji, who was the first Indian MP of the British Parliament, was in fact the one who stated the fact that British were unaware of the plight of the Indians, and he made sure that the British heard what the Indians had to say. So in order to do so, he went abroad and garnered support for the Indian national movement. In doing so, Dadabhai Naoroji also established the fact that there is a drain of wealth. So he established the theory of drain of wealth, where he stated that Indian indigenous wealth revenue was now going directly to the British pockets. In doing so, Dadabhai Naoroji also established the book and the ideas in the book, which was called the Un-British Rule in India. So he was in fact elected in Britain as the first MP, and in doing the political work that Dadabhai Naoroji took forward, he was also in fact selected as the 3 times president for the Indian National Congress sessions that were held and that passed important political changes that were taken by Indian National Congress, from the Swadeshi boycott and the establishment of the mass national movement. So in a jiffy, if we try to locate the achievements of Dadabhai Naoroji, we can see that he founded London India Society in 1865 and East India Association in 1866 with the purpose of opening the British eyes to Indian problems, because he believed that once the British would see the problems, they would automatically pay heed to it. It was because of his efforts that Indian civil service examination began to be held simultaneously in England and India. Third was the fact that his book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India had explained the famous drain of wealth theory, as we discussed. Fourth, as the president of the INC, he initiated the passing of major resolutions of Swaraj, national education, Swadeshi and boycott. And fifth, he was in fact the first nationalist leader to call for self-governance or Swaraj for India. Now, the person who, readily took up the changes and the agitation towards the British, but in a more non-violent way and in a more debateful manner, was that of Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, or readily known as by his last name Gokhale, was somebody who focused on the methods of debate, appeals and discussions with the British regarding the problems that Indians were facing. So moderate in his methods and aimed to persuade the British to reform unjust policies by urging them through arguments, right? So Gokhale was the one who established the Servants of India Society in 1905 to conduct charitable activities in the society and to train national leaders for future. So Gokhale was somebody who was actually the forerunner of the nationalist movement and also framed the nationalist movement per se. So he was somebody who focused on the economic changes that was required in India, and in doing so, as a member of the Imperial Legislative Council, Gokhale focused on the radical fiscal economic changes that were required, including the reduction of excise duty on cotton textile, so reduction on the duties that India had to pay for its exports on the products, and land revenue and abolition of toll tax and salt tax, which were very, very burdensome for Indian people. He was also the one who promoted the idea of government aided free primary education of Indian people. So in his methods of agitation, in his methods of partaking social reforms, Gokhale was also able to garner support from somebody like Ratan Tata. So his initiatives, Gokhale received steady support from Sir Ratan Tata, who supported him economically through funds. So we see, because of his contributions, the British garnered Gokhale with the title of CIE. So for his contribution to Indian development, for his firm belief in constitutional and peaceful methods, and that is the key word here, that he focused on methods that did not leave the ambit of constitution made by the British, Gokhale was awarded the title of CIE by the British government as an honor, but he returned the title, his knighthood, to the British as a protest against the atrocities that were being committed by the British in 1914. Thus, we see Gopal Krishna Gokhale being the forerunner of the Indian national movement and is often seen as a mentor to Gandhi. So, he was somebody who made Gandhi look at the Indian national movement, guided him to the Indian national movement after Gandhi came back from South Africa. So, Gopal Krishna Gokhale acted as a mentor to Gandhi. Another pioneer in the changes that the early nationalists were bringing was that of Surendranath Banerjee. So Surendranath Banerjee, who is often referred to as the father of Indian nationalism, also focused on agitational methods that were in the ambit of constitution, of course, but he focused on reforms that voiced the opinions of the Indians and also educated the Indians about what exactly the British were doing in the country. So the contribution of Surendranath Banerjee would include that he was among the first few Indians to pass the Indian civil service examinations and also served 4 terms in Bengal Legislative Council. So he was the one who established Indian Association in 1876, which aimed at unifying the Indian public opinion and protest against unjust measures that were being taken by the British, like that of the Arms Act, the Vernacular Press Act, the License Act, and the policy of reducing the maximum age for appearing for the Indian civil service examination from 21 to 19 years, so that it becomes difficult for the Indians to sit for the examination. So he was also a person who established, the paper of Bengali, which not only showcased what was going on in India, but also voiced the agitative movement against the British. So he published the thoughts on Indian nationalism in the newspaper Bengali. He also came out with a book titled A Nation in the Making, which you can see in the copy. So can you tell me who was known as the father of Indian nationalism? Was it Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Surendranath Banerjee, Dadabhai Naoroji, or Satyendranath Tagore? The correct answer will be Surendranath Banerjee. So at this point of time, we see that the British attitude towards the Congress now being formed, the Indian National Congress or the early nationalists, were in fact very moderate. They were not moved by the agitations or the constitutional reforms, and the constitutional methodology that the early nationalists, the moderates, took could not really shake the British. But after 1888, we see that the British now, realized that these people who were taking to boycott and Swadeshi were now moving into the ambit of, voicing protest against the British imperial government. So initially the attitude of the British government in India towards the Congress was of neutrality or mostly indifference. After the 4th session of Congress in 1888, the government adopted the hostile attitude towards it. So it realized that, the INC was now garnering more support from Indian people. So now the British government started to back hostile elements and secessionist elements like that of the Aligarh movement. So the government encouraged hostile elements like the Aligarh movement. So after the coming of Lord Curzon is when we see a great change, a structural change happening in the British policies, because Lord Curzon ideally wanted a peaceful demise of Indian National Congress, and in doing so he brought about his divisionist policies, his policy of divide and rule, where he wanted to partition Bengal in 1905 on the base of communal attitudes. So under Lord Curzon, the British attitude towards Congress became more and more hostile, and the government under Lord Curzon wanted to weaken the nationalist elements in general and Congress in particular by causing hostility amongst the leaders by communalizing the Indian politics. So ideally Lord Curzon also created a rift between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. So to understand the early nationalists and the moderates, it is important to realize that their methodologies, being that of constitutional agitation, though it created the Indian national movement, did not create much fervor in the British minds. What it did in fact was, it slowed down the process of Indian nationalism, and it could not be radical, and that is why it could not succeed in its methods. So the mandate that the early nationalists created, the goals that they created, could not readily be achieved. So they are often criticized of being too mild in their strategy of press, petition and protests, similar to begging the British for changes. It almost felt like they were begging for self-rule of India. Second was that early nationalists failed to understand the inherently exploitative nature of the British authorities, because they believed in the innate good of the British. Third was the fact that instead of dealing with the problems from inside the Indian structure directly, the early nationalists depended heavily on the British goodwill for effecting the changes. So they thought that in fact if they bring forward the problems of the people, then the British will take a stand against it, but that was not the case. So instead of taking readily to service of people, they chose to appeal to the British. Fourthly, the early nationalists failed to involve the masses in national movement, because of which the early nationalist movement could not really be popular. Now, the entire fact here is that the early nationalists and the group of early nationalists, the moderate, included, a group of urban, educated, high-class intelligentsia, and did not include the common masses. So they could not understand that the common masses had enough power that could be garnered to take the national movement forward. Though their, important agitative methods did create a sort of structure for the Indian national movement that was to be taken forward later, the Indian early nationalists or the moderates, with their, with their ideas of constitutional agitations, failed and could not take forward the mandate that they had established. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games, and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.